when Rogue One, a Star Wars story, hit theaters on December 16, 2016, it felt like something truly different in the Star Wars universe. Unlike the main episodic films, Rogue One didn't follow the Skywalker family saga, nor did it fit into the familiar pattern of a Jedi hero facing off against the Sith. Instead, it was a gritty, grounded war film set within the fantastical science fiction world of Star Wars. The film was advertised as a standalone entry, marking it as the first in a series of Star Wars anthology films. The story centers around Jyn Erso, Felicity Jones, a woman who becomes the leader of a ragtag group of rebels tasked with stealing the Death Star plans. The Empire's superweapon, the Death Star, is capable of destroying entire planets, and the rebellion's last hope lies in acquiring the plans to find its weakness. The movie is essentially a heist mission set against the backdrop of a desperate struggle for survival as the fate of the galaxy hinges on a group of unlikely heroes. The core premise of Rogue One is simple but powerful. A small band of rebels goes on a high-risk mission to do what seems impossible: steal vital intelligence from the Empire, putting their lives in danger to fight for a cause bigger than themselves. While the plot itself is straightforward, it's the characters, the world building, and the way the film tackles themes of sacrifice, resistance, and the cost of war that give it a unique edge in the Star Wars universe. Franchise and genre context. In the grand tapestry of Star Wars, Rogue One exists as a prequel to A New Hope, and it directly sets up the events leading into that film. It's not just a side story, though. It fills in a critical gap in the lore. Before Rogue One, we never truly understood how the Rebel Alliance came to know the Death Star's one glaring vulnerability, a flaw built into the design by none other than Galen Erso, played by Mads Mikkelsen, Jyn's estranged father. The film answers questions that were left hanging for decades, especially the line in A New Hope where Princess Leia refers to the stolen Death Star plans as the plans to the ultimate weapon of destruction. What makes Rogue One stand out in the Star Wars franchise is how it blends the grand mythology of the galaxy with a more grounded, almost documentary-like take on warfare. Unlike the epic Jedi-Sith battles and the spacefaring escapades of the main saga, Rogue One captures the brutal, often tragic nature of war. It showcases the sacrifices of ordinary people fighting against an overwhelmingly powerful enemy, a stark contrast to the Jedi who can take on entire armies with the Force. In terms of genre, Rogue One pushes the boundaries of what a Star Wars film can be. While it's still part of the larger science fiction/fantasy genre, it incorporates a heavy war film element. Think of films like Saving Private Ryan or The Dirty Dozen. While those films deal with real-world events, Rogue One borrows a lot of their stylistic choices: gritty combat, morally gray characters, and the stark reality of soldiers, or rebels in this case, who might not make it back home. It's a film that's less about the magic of the Force and more about the human will to fight against an empire that's intent on controlling everything. Director's vision and creative influences. Rogue One was directed by Gareth Edwards, best known for his 2014 reboot of Godzilla. With Edwards at the helm, Rogue One takes on a different flavor than other Star Wars films, which often rely heavily on high-stakes space battles, larger-than-life heroes, and the mystical aura of the Force. Edwards brought a fresh perspective to the Star Wars universe by grounding the action in a realistic, almost documentary-like style. His approach was more in line with what you might expect from a war film, focusing on the rawness and immediacy of battle and the personal stakes for each character. Significant influence on Rogue One was George Lucas's original vision for Star Wars. While Rogue One isn't a story Lucas had in mind, its placement within the larger saga feels like a natural extension of his universe. The film ties into the ethos of the original trilogy, particularly the rebel fighters who are outnumbered, under-equipped, and fighting a losing battle against the Empire. What's fascinating is that Rogue One plays heavily on the themes of rebellion and sacrifice, which Lucas explored in his original trilogy, but with a more modern and mature perspective. The characters in Rogue One don't always win. In fact, none of them make it out alive, which is a stark contrast to the typical hero's journey seen in many Star Wars stories. One thing that stands out is the film's deliberate choice to steer clear of the magical elements of Star Wars, such as the Force. Jyn Erso isn't a Jedi. She's a leader who relies on strategy, courage, and the loyalty of her team. The team of rebels she leads, Cassian Andor, Diego Luna, K2SO Alan Tudyk, Bodhi Rook, Riz Ahmed, Chirrut Mwe, Donnie Yen, and Baze Malbus, Jiang Wen, all bring different skills and backstory that add emotional weight to the film. The story is about regular people who find the courage to do extraordinary things, and their journey isn't about destiny. It's about choosing to fight for something greater than themselves. Pre-release buzz and marketing. Before Rogue One hit theaters, the film generated an intense amount of excitement and speculation among fans. Being the first Star Wars spin-off film, it was a gamble. Fans had only known Star Wars through its episodic installments, so the idea of a side story felt risky. Would Rogue One live up to the legacy of the original trilogy? Would it feel like a true Star Wars movie, or would it falter in trying to fit into that iconic universe? The marketing campaign played heavily on nostalgia, often using iconic imagery from the original trilogy and tying it back to the larger Star Wars mythos. Early trailers teased the return of Darth Vader, which was enough to send chills down the spine of any Star Wars fan. Even though he wasn't the central antagonist of the film, the brief shots of Vader in the trailers were a reminder of the Empire's overwhelming power and a promise that the film would be filled with action and tension. The first teaser, which included the haunting line, "The Force is with me and I am with the Force," gave the impression that Rogue One would be darker, more mature, and more personal than previous films in the series. But it wasn't just the traditional Star Wars fan base that had their eyes on the film. Critics and casual moviegoers alike were intrigued by the idea of a grittier, war-focused Star Wars story. This shift in tone away from the flashy lightsaber battles and the clear-cut morality of the Jedi-Sith conflict drew a lot of attention. The question on everyone's mind was whether or not a Star Wars film could succeed without a Skywalker at the center. Expectations. By the time Rogue One was released, expectations were high. Fans of Star Wars had seen what Disney was capable of with The Force Awakens, and they were eager to see how a spin-off film would handle the Star Wars formula. Would Rogue One offer a fresh perspective while maintaining the magic of the original universe? Could it succeed in carving out its own identity while still feeling like part of the larger Star Wars galaxy? There was also the worry that the film might fall short of expectations. Spin-offs can sometimes feel like an afterthought, a quick cash grab to capitalize on a beloved franchise. But Rogue One came with the promise of a darker, more grounded approach to the Star Wars universe, one that would tell a different kind of story about the rebellion. For the first time, we weren't going to follow a lone hero with extraordinary powers, but rather a team of regular people who had to fight just to survive. Thesis statement. This analysis will explore how Rogue One, a Star Wars story balances being a war film, a heist story, and a Star Wars prequel all at once. We'll dive deep into the characters, the emotional weight of their choices, the technical aspects of the film, and the themes that run through its story. We'll also look at how Rogue One fits within the Star Wars universe and how it has impacted the legacy of the franchise. By examining both the creative process behind the film and its reception, we'll get a better sense of what makes Rogue One unique in a galaxy far away. Production and development, concept and inception. The journey of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, began as an idea rooted in the desire to expand the Star Wars universe beyond its main episodic saga. After Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012, it became clear that the Star Wars franchise had the potential to tell more stories than just those about the Skywalker family. The success of the first two sequel films, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, was proof that audiences were hungry for fresh perspectives, even if it meant stepping outside the familiar boundaries of the core storyline. The genesis of Rogue One can be traced to the realization that one of the most important stories left untold was how the rebellion managed to steal the plans for the Empire's dreaded Death Star. This setup was teased briefly in A New Hope when Princess Leia, in her distress message to Obi-Wan Kenobi, mentions how the plans to the Death Star were stolen. But the specifics of that mission were never explored, leaving an exciting gap in the lore. The idea of a ragtag group of rebels stealing the plans and taking on the overwhelming might of the Empire felt like the perfect premise for a standalone Star Wars movie. Rogue One, as a spin-off, was conceived to be part of a larger series of anthology films that would take place in different parts of the Star Wars timeline. With the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's expansive storytelling model, it seemed like a great opportunity for Lucasfilm to create stories that were tangential to the main saga, but still enriched the universe. While the initial idea was centered around a heist to steal the Death Star plans, the narrative quickly evolved into a tale of sacrifice, rebellion, and the human cost of war. The film was also meant to be a departure from the traditional Star Wars stories, focusing on a more realistic portrayal of war. Rogue One was positioned as a grittier, more mature take on the Star Wars universe, with its focus on ordinary people fighting extraordinary battles. The decision to create this darker tone ultimately influenced both the creative direction and the overall look and feel of the film. The script and rewrites, as with most films, Rogue One underwent several changes in its script before reaching the final cut we see today. The original screenplay was written by Chris Weitz and Tony Gilroy, with the story being crafted by John Knoll, a longtime visual effects supervisor at ILM and Gary Whitta. Early drafts of the script were more traditional in their approach, sticking closer to the grand narrative style of Star Wars films, but it soon became clear that the film needed to be more grounded. The early drafts of Rogue One had a different tone, one that didn't capture the full weight of the sacrifices made by the rebels, nor did it focus enough on the human drama that would give the story its emotional resonance. As a result, director Gareth Edwards and the film's producers found themselves grappling with how to balance the action-packed nature of the story with the emotional stakes. The script, while solid, wasn't quite right for the darker, more mature approach they envisioned. As production progressed, significant changes were made, leading to some tension behind the scenes. The film underwent extensive reshoots to adjust pacing, rework character arcs, and enhance the emotional weight of certain key scenes. While reshoots are a common part of filmmaking, Rogue One became infamous for its extensive reworkings. Tony Gilroy, who had written the script for The Bourne Legacy, was brought in to help rewrite the film, especially after the initial rough cut didn't hit the mark. Gilroy helped shape the final version of the film, refining the narrative and adding a more cohesive emotional through line. One of the most significant changes during the rewrites was the film's ending. The original script had a slightly more conventional ending, but the final version, which resulted in the heroic death of almost every major character, brought a level of sacrifice and gravitas to the film that resonated deeply with audiences. The somber tone of the film's conclusion stood in stark contrast to the usual heroic victories found in most Star Wars movies, and this choice marked Rogue One as a story about the price of resistance rather than the triumph of a chosen hero. Directorial approach. Gareth Edwards, known for his work on the 2014 Godzilla film, was brought on board to direct Rogue One. What Edwards brought to the table was a unique, grounded style that was a departure from the grandiose nature of previous Star Wars films. His approach was to treat Rogue One not as a traditional Star Wars film, but as a war movie set in a galaxy fair, far away. The gritty realism Edwards infused into the film's action sequences and overall aesthetic made it feel like a war film, much like Saving Private Ryan or Black Hawk Down, but set in the Star Wars universe. Edwards' use of practical effects and on-location filming helped give Rogue One a lived-in, realistic look that contrasted with the highly stylized visuals of The Force Awakens or the prequels. He wanted to make sure that everything from the Rebel base to the cities they invaded felt authentic and believable. Edwards' decision to use real-world locations, including the deserts of the Maldives and the dramatic landscapes of Iceland, gave Rogue One a tactile realism that made it feel less like a fantasy and more like a depiction of a real-world rebellion against a fascist regime. Another key aspect of Edwards' direction was his understanding of how to balance fan expectations with the desire to create something new. Fans were, understandably, nervous about the film's departure from the main saga. The film's marketing played heavily on nostalgia, teasing appearances from characters like Darth Vader and the return of iconic elements like the Death Star. However, Edwards managed to infuse the film with new characters and an entirely different tone, ensuring that it felt fresh while still being deeply rooted in the Star Wars universe. Edwards masterfully balanced fan service with story integrity, weaving in references to the larger Star Wars mythos without letting them dominate the narrative. The film was able to feel new and exciting while still acknowledging the legacy of the original trilogy. This was especially evident in the inclusion of iconic Star Wars elements like the X-Wing fighters, TIE fighters, and the epic space battles, which were all presented in a new light, focusing on the desperation of the rebellion as they fought back against a nearly invincible enemy. Casting decisions. The casting of Rogue One was crucial to making sure that the film felt as emotionally resonant as it did. Felicity Jones, known for her roles in The Theory of Everything and The Invisible Woman, was cast as the lead, Jyn Erso. Jyn is not your typical Star Wars hero. She's not a Jedi, and she isn't driven by any sense of destiny. Instead, she's a reluctant leader who grows into her role as the film progresses. Jones's performance captures this transition perfectly, bringing depth to the character who, like the rest of the cast, is marked by a sense of loss and duty. Alongside Jones, the ensemble cast brought an incredible range of characters to life. Diego Luna, as Cassian Andor, played the charismatic but morally conflicted rebel officer who has been carrying the weight of war on his shoulders for years. Luna's chemistry with Jones brought the right mix of camaraderie and tension to their partnership. Ben Mendelsohn, a standout in his role as Orson Krennic, the director of the Death Star project, portrayed a character that was both menacing and vulnerable. His portrayal of Krennic as a man who is constantly trying to prove his worth to Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine added layers to what could have been a one-dimensional villain. Krennic's obsession with his power and the Death Star project made him a formidable antagonist, yet Mendelssohn's performance showed the insecurities beneath the surface. Other key supporting characters, such as Donnie Yen's Chirrut, Wee, and Alan Tudyk's K2 SO, added depth and humor to the film. Chirrut, a blind warrior who believes deeply in the Force despite not being a Jedi, provided both a philosophical counterpoint and a fan-favorite moment with his famous line, "I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me."
K2... SO, the sarcastic Imperial droid reprogrammed by Cassian, brought much-needed comic relief, while also serving as an emotionally complex character.
To capture the realism and grounded tone Edwards was aiming for, Rogue One was filmed in a variety of diverse locations, each chosen to create a lived-in, believable galaxy. The film was shot in the UK with several scenes filmed in real-world locations like the rugged terrain of Iceland and the vast deserts of the Maldives. These natural settings were used to portray planets that felt lived in, unlike the sterile, futuristic look that some might expect from a Star Wars film. The Rebel base on Yavin 4, for example, was filmed in a real jungle environment, providing a sense of authenticity and grit that was central to the film's warlike tone. The set design was a mixture of iconic Star Wars aesthetics and new, unique elements. The Death Star, TIATs, and Star Destroyers were recreated with incredible detail, maintaining the classic look that fans love. However, new designs for ships and technology added freshness, like the U-Wing and the sleek new designs for the Imperial ships. The visual effects team also worked tirelessly to blend practical effects with CGI, ensuring that each scene felt tactile and grounded in reality. In short, Rogue One stands as a testament to the dedication of the filmmakers to create an authentic, immersive experience. Its unique blend of practical locations, detailed set design, and carefully selected actors made it a remarkable addition to the Star Wars universe. Cinematography and visual style. One of the most striking elements of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, is its visual style, which sets it apart from other films in the Star Wars franchise. At the heart of this raw, grounded look is cinematographer Greg Fraser, who brought a fresh approach to the visual storytelling of this standalone entry. Fraser, who had previously worked on films like Zero Dark 30 and Lion, brought his unique expertise to create a film that feels far more tactile and immersive compared to the more polished aesthetic of previous Star Wars entries. Fraser's cinematography in Rogue One embraced a raw, gritty visual style that grounded the story in the harsh realities of war. His choice to use natural lighting throughout the film, especially in the outdoor scenes, helped achieve a look that felt less fantastical and more realistic, making the viewer feel as if they were right there with the characters. This naturalistic approach contrasts with the often pristine, high-tech look that many Star Wars films are known for, making Rogue One feel more authentic and urgent. The film's visual style also employed handheld camera techniques, which created a sense of immediacy and immersion. Whether it's the intense combat on the surface of Scarif or the quiet moments of reflection between characters, the handheld camera work places the audience directly in the action. There's a sense of chaos and tension in these scenes, allowing the viewer to experience the unease and unpredictability of the battle alongside the characters. It also complements the overall grittiness of the film, emphasizing that these aren't just heroic figures facing off against a faceless enemy. These rebels are fighting against impossible odds, and the camera work brings that struggle into sharp focus. Fraser also made extensive use of wide shots to capture the scale and grandeur of the action. These shots are not just about showing the scale of the environments or the battles. They're about emphasizing the isolation and vulnerability of the characters within these vast landscapes. Take the expansive shots of the desert planet of Jeddah or the towering structures on Scarif. They're not just impressive landscapes, they're reflective of the enormous challenges the rebels face, underscoring their insignificance when compared to the might of the Empire. These sweeping wide shots add a layer of visual storytelling, further immersing viewers in the emotional weight of the film's narrative. Visual world building. The world building in Rogue One is one of its standout features, with the filmmakers and design team working tirelessly to create visually distinct, yet familiar, locations that fit seamlessly within the Star Wars universe. Every setting in Rogue One is carefully designed to enhance the tone of the film and the story being told, and each planet feels distinct, contributing to the film's overall grounded, warlike atmosphere. Jedha, for example, the planet at the center of the Empire's efforts to extract Kyber crystals, is a barren desert world that mirrors the desolation of its people. The ruins of a once thriving city lie in the background, suggesting the Empire's destructive presence. The overall muted color palette of browns, grays, and beige enhances the desolate feel of the environment, making it feel like a place where hope is in short supply. The way the camera lingers on the ruins, with its enormous, broken statues and abandoned structures, paints a picture of the devastation caused by the Empire's war machine. Scarif, the film's climactic battleground, is visually striking in its contrast to the desolate landscapes of Jeddah. With its tropical beaches and pristine waters, Scarif could easily be mistaken for a peaceful paradise, but it is revealed to be the site of an Empire stronghold, housing the most destructive weapon ever built, the Death Star. The design of Scarif, with its vast imperial complexes rising above the calm beaches, echoes the dissonance of the rebellion's struggle. The paradise-like exterior is a stark contrast to the industrial, militaristic purpose for which it is used, highlighting the grim reality of war in the Star Wars universe. The wide, sweeping shots of Scarif's beaches and its brutal military installations create a sense of scale and inevitability, reinforcing the stakes of the battle. Then there's the planet of Eadu, where the Empire is developing weapons for the Death Star. Eadu's dark, stormy skies, jagged mountains, and rainy atmosphere provide a fitting backdrop for the sinister work being done there. The setting feels cold and oppressive, much like the regime that controls it. Eadu is visually less welcoming than the other locations in the film, underscoring the secrecy and danger that surrounds the Empire's operations. These locations are all carefully constructed to not only convey the political and thematic weight of the film, but also to create a visual environment that enriches the narrative. The setting choices, from the war-torn streets of Jeddah to the pristine beaches of Scarif, do more than just serve as backdrops for action scenes. They help to communicate the larger themes of the movie, the destruction brought on by the Empire, the bleakness of rebellion, and the ultimate sacrifice that the characters are willing to make in the name of hope, special effects, and practical stunts. Rogue One is notable for how it blends practical effects with cutting-edge digital effects. While CGI was certainly a crucial component of the film, the filmmakers were determined to maintain a balance that retained the tactile, real-world feel of the original Star Wars trilogy. The production made extensive use of practical effects, including miniatures and physical sets, which helped the film feel more grounded in reality. This blend of practical and digital effects created a seamless visual experience that didn't rely solely on technology, but instead emphasized the physicality of the world the characters inhabited. The space battles, one of the most iconic elements of any Star Wars film, were a perfect example of this blend of practical and digital effects. The dogfights between the Rebel and Imperial fleets were shot using a combination of physical models of the ships and cutting-edge CGI. The result is a visceral, exciting action sequence that feels incredibly realistic. The visual effects team at ILM Industrial Light and Magic worked to create detailed and dynamic space battles that didn't just rely on flashy explosions, but also took the time to build tension and strategy in the battle sequences. The realism of these battles makes them more emotionally engaging, especially when the stakes are as high as they are in Rogue One. In addition to the space battles, the practical effects are also on display in the ground combat sequences. The film's action scenes, especially on planets like Scarif and Jeddah, are raw and intense. The combat feels far more visceral than the choreographed lightsaber duels or blaster shootouts we've seen in other Star Wars films. This is partly due to the practical stunts that were used throughout the film. The stunt coordinators and actors worked hard to create action scenes that felt gritty and real, with the camera capturing the full intensity of the combat. The close quarters fights, explosions, and firefights are all presented in a way that emphasizes the chaos and uncertainty of battle. Post-production process. The post-production process for Rogue One was especially intense, as the film underwent extensive reshoots and editing to refine its tone and pacing. The decision to reshoot a significant portion of the film came after an early rough cut of the movie revealed that the story needed more emotional weight and tighter pacing. This led to the involvement of Tony Gilroy, who was brought in to help rewrite the script and oversee the reshoots, which ultimately shaped the film into the version audiences saw in theaters. The editing process, handled by John Gilroy, played a crucial role in crafting the tight, urgent narrative of the film. Rogue One moves at a brisk pace, with very few lulls between its action sequences. The editing helps create a sense of urgency, with every scene contributing to the film's forward momentum. Yet, despite the fast pace, the film never feels rushed. There's still time for emotional beats to land, especially in the quiet moments between characters. The final space battle on Scarif, in particular, is a prime example of how well the post-production team was able to balance spectacle with emotional depth. The editing, visual effects, and sound design all come together to create a battle that is as emotionally charged as it is visually spectacular. The sequence is one of the most breathtaking moments in Star Wars history, and it's the result of meticulous work in post-production, blending practical effects with CGI to create something that feels both grand and grounded in the reality of war. Visual effects integration. The integration of ILM's visual effects into the narrative is flawless, and they contribute heavily to the emotional stakes of the film. In particular, the seamless use of CGI in bringing back classic characters like Grand Moff Tarkin, Peter Cushing, and Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher, is a testament to the technology's advancement, and it was done in a way that didn't detract from the story's emotional core. The visual effects team also used CGI to create spectacular environments, such as the Death Star's interior and the enormous space battles that fit seamlessly into the film's grounded tone. Rogue One is a triumph in how it blends visual effects with storytelling, creating a cinematic experience that is both visually stunning and emotionally powerful. The visual style, cinematography, and effects all work together to immerse the audience in a universe that feels familiar but also new, offering a fresh perspective on the Star Wars saga. Detailed plot summary setting the stage. Rogue One, a Star Wars story, takes place just before A New Hope and sets the stage for one of the most iconic events in Star Wars lore, the theft of the Death Star plans. At the center of this mission is Jyn Erso, a character whose backstory is key to understanding both her personal journey and the larger narrative at play. Let's break down how the film introduces Jyn's story, the looming conflict, and the formation of the ragtag rebel team tasked with pulling off the impossible. Introduction to Jyn Erso. Jyn Erso's life is marked by tragedy and loss from the very beginning. Born into a family of scientists, Jyn's early years are spent in relative peace on a farm with her parents. However, her life takes a dramatic turn when the Empire forces her father, Galen Erso, played by Mads Mikkelsen, to work on the construction of the Death Star, the Empire's superweapon capable of destroying entire planets. Galen, who was once a scientist committed to peaceful work, is coerced into contributing to the weapon's development under threat of harm to his family. This forced involvement is a central part of Jyn's motivation. Her father's work on the Death Star is shrouded in secrecy, and after his forced departure, Jyn is left with no clear understanding of his fate or the role he might play in the Empire's destructive ambitions. In a tragic twist, when Jyn is only a young child, her mother is killed during an attack by Imperial forces and her father is captured by the Empire. Jyn, now alone, is forced to flee and hide from the Empire, growing up in the shadows and becoming hardened by her experiences. As an adult, Jyn is a fugitive and has little faith in the Rebel Alliance or the larger cause of the rebellion. She is a survivor of Imperial brutality, living under the radar while harboring deep resentment and anger. Her journey begins when she is rescued from an Imperial prison by the Rebel Alliance, who want to recruit her for a mission that could change the course of the war, stealing the Death Star plans. Establishing the conflict. The central conflict of Rogue One revolves around the Empire's creation of the Death Star, a weapon of unimaginable power that threatens the entire galaxy. The Death Star is a symbol of the Empire's totalitarian might and is the weapon that could end the fight for freedom in the galaxy. It has the capability to destroy entire planets with a single shot, and it is clear that if the Empire unleashes this power, there may be no stopping it. For the Rebel Alliance, the stakes could not be higher. The only hope of stopping the Death Star lies in finding and destroying its weakness. The key to understanding how to defeat the weapon lies in the Death Star plans, which are hidden deep within the Empire's fortress on the planet Scarif. The Rebel Alliance is desperate to find these plans and expose the flaw in the Death Star's design that could lead to its destruction. However, the Empire is aware of the threat and has taken extensive measures to keep these plans out of Rebel hands. Jyn Erso's father, Galen, plays an unexpected role in this conflict. In a pivotal revelation, Jyn learns that her father secretly sabotaged the Death Star during its construction. Galen's final gift to the galaxy is the inclusion of a design flaw that, if exploited, could destroy the weapon. This flaw is hidden within the Death Star plans, and Galen's decision to embed it there becomes the key to the rebellion's hope of victory. The destruction of the Death Star can only happen if the plans are obtained a mission that will require bravery, sacrifice, and a team of unlikely heroes. But as she begins to learn about her father's role in the creation of the weapon, she is also faced with the realization that she has a personal stake in this war. Her father's actions may be the galaxy's only hope, but they also carry the weight of his complicity in building a weapon of mass destruction. Recruitment and team formation. As Jin is brought into the fold of the Rebel Alliance, a team of diverse and complex characters is assembled to carry out the mission to steal the Death Star plans. The group is led by Cassian Andor Diego Luna, a skilled Rebel intelligence officer whose calm demeanor hides the emotional toll of years of fighting in the rebellion. Cassian is no stranger to difficult decisions and has a pragmatic view of the rebellion's need to get the job done, no matter the cost. Cassian, despite his stern exterior, is deeply committed to the cause, though he carries his own burden of moral compromises made in the name of the greater good. He's tasked with leading the team, and his relationship with Jin is one of growth, trust, and the discovery of shared values. Joining Cassian is the reprogrammed Imperial droid K2SO, voiced by Alan Tudyk, who provides much-needed comic relief while also demonstrating loyalty and courage in the face of danger. K2SO is a former Imperial droid whose memory has been wiped and reprogrammed by the rebels, and though his sarcastic personality might suggest he's an unreliable ally, he proves to be a vital asset. His unexpected loyalty and sense of humor provide much-needed levity in the darker moments of the mission, and his ultimate sacrifice adds emotional depth to his character arc. Then there's Chirrut Mi Wei Donnie Yen, a blind warrior monk who is deeply connected to the Force, even though he is not a Jedi. Chirrut's faith in the Force is unwavering, and his belief that the Force will guide him on his mission lends a spiritual depth to the team's journey. His friendship with Baze Malbus Jiang Wen, a former soldier and reluctant warrior, is another key aspect of the group dynamics. While Baze is more skeptical of the Force, his loyalty to Chirrut and the cause is undeniable. Together, Chirrut and Baze offer a unique perspective on the conflict, blending physical prowess with spiritual conviction. Bodhi Rook Riz Ahmed, a former Imperial cargo pilot who defects to the Rebel Alliance, rounds out the team. Bodhi is perhaps the most reluctant member of the group, but his internal struggle and eventual dedication to the cause prove crucial in the mission. As a man with deep guilt over his past involvement with the Empire, Bodhi's journey is one of redemption. His role as the one who delivers the message of Galen Erso's sabotage to the rebels is pivotal, and he serves as a reminder that people from all backgrounds can make a difference in the fight against tyranny. This team of diverse individuals, each with their own pasts, flaws, and motivations, must come together to accomplish the impossible, infiltrating the heavily guarded Imperial facility on Scarif and stealing the Death Star plans. Their relationships evolve throughout the film, moving from mistrust and uncertainty to a deep, unshakable bond formed in the crucible of war. The strength of their alliance is not just in their individual skills, but in their shared commitment to a greater cause, the hope of defeating the Empire and bringing freedom to the galaxy. As the mission unfolds, the dynamics between these characters reveal their shared humanity, and they each contribute in unique ways to the success of their mission. The film showcases how their individual strengths, whether it's Cassian's tactical genius, Jin's leadership abilities, or Chirrut's spiritual wisdom, complement one another in ways that transcend their differences. Together, they represent the heart of the Rebel Alliance, a group of imperfect people willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in the fight for something greater than themselves. Their mission to steal the Death Star plans, though ultimately doomed, becomes a beacon of hope for the galaxy, setting the stage for the events of A New Hope and the eventual victory over the Empire. In the end, Rogue One is not just about stealing the plans. It's about the sacrifices made by these individuals, each one contributing to a larger purpose that will change the course of history. It is their courage, unity, and belief in the cause that makes them heroes, even if they do not survive to see the impact of their actions. The film beautifully captures the sense of rebellion, camaraderie, and the true cost of fighting against an oppressive empire. Rising action and escalating tension. As Rogue One continues its journey, the rising action takes us through escalating tensions, betrayals, and pivotal moments that not only build the narrative's urgency, but also delve deeper into the personal and ideological conflicts within the team. This section highlights the team's journey to Jeddah, their encounters with the underground resistance led by Saw Gerrera, and the ever-present tensions between the characters. At the same time, revelations about the Death Star's destructive power and the devastating knowledge of Galen Erso's deliberate sabotage propel the plot toward its thrilling climax. Journey to Jeddah. Enter Saw Gerrera and the Underground Rebellion. After forming their team, Jin, Cassian, K2, Esso, Chirrut, Baze, and Bodhi set off to locate the Death Star plans and ultimately stop the Empire's cataclysmic weapon. Their first major stop is the desert planet of Jeddah, a place already under siege by the Empire, as it is believed to be a source of kyber crystals, the very crystals used to power the Death Star's destructive superlaser. Jeddah is not only geographically crucial, but spiritually significant, as it is a holy place for those who follow the Force, particularly for Chirrut Mway, a blind warrior who believes deeply in the Force despite not being a Jedi. As they arrive, the planet is clearly under the control of the Empire. The once thriving city of Jeddah is now a war-torn wasteland, its inhabitants oppressed and its temples destroyed in the wake of Imperial occupation. The rebel group is hoping to connect with Saw Gerrera, Forrest Whitaker, a radical leader who once fought for the rebellion, but has since become a more isolated and extreme figure. Saw's underground movement, known as the Partisans, represents a different, more militant faction of the rebellion, willing to go to any lengths, even brutal, morally gray methods to resist the Empire. Saw Gerrera, however, is a deeply conflicted character. His methods, once in line with the rebellion's overall goals, have become increasingly extreme over time. His obsession with destroying the Empire at all costs has led him down a path of terror, where he employs ruthless tactics, often alienating those who once fought alongside him. Saw's distrust of the official rebel alliance creates significant tension between him and the more diplomatic members of the group, particularly Cassian, whose loyalty is to the larger rebellion. When Jin and her team encounter Saw in the crumbling ruins of Jeddah, they are met not only with an untrusting, paranoid figure, but with a man haunted by years of warfare and loss. Saw provides the team with important intelligence about the location of the Death Star plans, but it comes with a price. They must first witness the consequences of the Empire's power. Saw leads them to an abandoned Imperial facility where the group is horrified to see that the Empire has tested the Death Star's full power on the planet, obliterating much of Jedha in a single strike. This cataclysmic event serves as a harsh reminder of the stakes of their mission. The Death Star is not just a theoretical threat, it has already killed millions. Betrayal and conflict, ideological clashes within the team. The journey to Jeddah also brings out significant tensions within the rebel group. Although they are all united in the fight against the Empire, each member of the team carries their own personal motivations, which occasionally come into conflict with the broader goals of the mission. One of the key conflicts arises between Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor. Jyn, at the start of the film, is reluctant to join the rebellion, motivated by personal grief and a sense of abandonment. She has lost her father, and for much of her life, she has fought to survive alone. Her desire for revenge against the Empire is strong, but her commitment to the rebellion is tentative at best. Cassian, on the other hand, is a seasoned rebellion operative who has seen the brutality of the Empire firsthand and is dedicated to the cause. He carries the emotional scars of many morally difficult decisions made in service to the rebellion, and he believes that the only way to defeat the Empire is through strategic, sometimes even ruthless, means. This ideological divide between Jyn and Cassian grows as they continue their journey. Jyn is not interested in the political complexities of the rebellion. She is solely focused on finding her father's plans and ending the Empire's reign of terror. Cassian, however, sees the larger picture. When Jyn learns that her father, Galen Erso, was responsible for designing the Death Star's fatal flaw, she becomes determined to act on this personal knowledge. Meanwhile, Cassian has orders from the Rebel Alliance to kill Galen in order to prevent him from being an asset to the Empire, regardless of the potential moral cost. This introduces a significant moral dilemma. The personal revenge Jyn seeks is in direct conflict with the strategic decisions Cassian has been instructed to make. Cassian's internal conflict becomes apparent when he reveals the truth to Jyn that he was ordered to assassinate her father before he could finish his work on the Death Star. This moment of betrayal causes a rift between them, and Jyn's initial anger at Cassian highlights the growing divide between her idealism and the rebellion's more pragmatic approach. However, as the journey progresses, both characters come to a deeper understanding of each other. Jyn learns to see the bigger picture and the sacrifices that must be made for the greater good, while Cassian begins to appreciate the personal stakes Jyn has in this fight. Climactic revelations, the Death Star's power and Galen Erso's sacrifice. The true turning point in Rogue One occurs when Jyn and her team discover the devastating truth about the Death Star's destructive power. After a harrowing confrontation with Imperial forces on Jedha, the group is forced to split up and head toward their next goal, Scarif, where the Death Star plans are held. Before they leave, however, Jyn finally learns the full scope of her father's role in the creation of the Death Star. It is here that Jyn uncovers the heartbreaking reality that Galen Erso, despite his forced cooperation with the Empire, secretly sabotaged the Death Star. Galen embedded a fatal flaw in the design of the weapon, a small but critical vulnerability that could be exploited to destroy the entire station. Galen's message, transmitted to the Rebel Alliance, reveals his motivations and his hope that someone would have the courage to use his flaw to destroy the weapon. Galen's revelation gives the mission even more emotional weight. The Death Star, which had previously seemed like an insurmountable threat, now has a way to be defeated. However, this discovery also underscores the immense personal sacrifice Galen made. He had to work for the Empire, building the weapon he despised, knowing that his actions would eventually result in his death. It's a powerful moment of revelation for Jyn, who had spent so much of her life resenting her father for his apparent betrayal, only to learn that he had been working to atone for his role in the Empire's destructive plans. This discovery is crucial not only to the success of the rebellion's mission, but also to the emotional core of the film. It highlights the themes of sacrifice and redemption, central elements in Rogue One and the broader Star Wars saga. The Death Star's flaw, a seemingly small but significant piece of information, becomes the key to the rebellion's hope. Jyn, Cassian, and the rest of the team are now fully committed to stealing the Death Star plans and passing them along to the Rebel Alliance despite the growing danger they face. The personal stakes are high, and the tensions between the characters, particularly Jin and Cassian, reach a boiling point as they prepare for the final assault on Scarif. This pivotal revelation changes the stakes of the film, transforming what was once a mission of simple sabotage into one of profound emotional and ideological significance. The rebellion is no longer about a faceless, impersonal struggle. It's about individuals making difficult choices, sacrificing for a cause, and dealing with the moral complexities of their action. In the rising action of Rogue One, the stakes increase dramatically. The team's journey to Jeddah, their conflicts with Saw Gerrera's faction, and the climactic revelations about the Death Star and Galen Erso's intentional flaw in its design all serve to escalate the tension. As Jin and her team head toward the inevitable showdown at Scarif, they are not just fighting for the Death Star plans. They are fighting for the future of the galaxy, with personal stakes driving every decision and every sacrifice they make. Climax, resolution, and denouement. As Rogue One barrels toward its heart-pounding conclusion, the climactic battle on the planet Scarif serves as the ultimate test for the rebellion and its ragtag group of heroes. The stakes have never been higher. The fate of the galaxy hangs in the balance, and each member of the team must face their destiny with the weight of the rebellion's hope on their shoulders. The final moments of the film, fraught with action, sacrifice, and emotional depth, leave a lasting impact on the narrative and the larger Star Wars saga. The Battle of Scarif, action, sacrifice, and heroism. Scarif, a heavily guarded Imperial facility, is the location where the Death Star plans are stored. As the Rebel team arrives at the planet, they face overwhelming odds. The Empire's presence is formidable, with massive Star Destroyers and ground forces standing between the Rebels and their goal. This marks the beginning of the film's high-stakes final battle. The Battle of Scarif unfolds on both the ground and in space. On the planet's surface, Jin and her team fight their way through an Imperial blockade to access the vital data vault where the Death Star plans are stored. Meanwhile, in orbit, the Rebel fleet engages in a desperate struggle against the Empire's starships, led by the menacing Imperial forces. The battle on the ground is chaotic and fast-paced, with gunfire, explosions, and close combat at every turn, underscoring the brutal reality of the rebellion's fight. Jin, Cassian, K2, SO Chirrut, Baze, and Bodhi work together to secure the plans, facing impossible odds. K2, SO, the droid with a sarcastic sense of humor, delivers a pivotal moment of self-sacrifice, holding off Imperial forces to ensure the success of the mission. His death, while heroic, marks the first major loss of the group. His final act highlights the deep connection between the human and droid characters, with K2SOA's personality and sacrifice becoming one of the film's most emotional moments. On the ground, Jin and Cassian make it into the Imperial Data Center, where they struggle against time to transmit the Death Star plans to the Rebel fleet. As they attempt to send the data, the Empire makes a final push to stop them. They are confronted by overwhelming Imperial forces, and the situation becomes increasingly dire. Despite all odds, Jin and Cassian are able to transmit the plans, but not without personal cost. The death of key characters, the ultimate sacrifices. The film's emotional climax is defined by the loss of its central characters. As the final transmission is sent, the Rebel team's mission is complete, but not without immense sacrifice. Jin and Cassian, trapped in the midst of an inferno of explosions and gunfire, face their inevitable end. Their deaths, while tragic, are the ultimate act of heroism. Jin, who started the film with a sense of abandonment and loss, finds purpose in this final moment, knowing that her actions have set the stage for the rebellion's victory. Cassian, once a man of cold pragmatism, becomes a symbol of hope and personal redemption in his final moments, knowing that the information they secured will fuel the Rebel Alliance's fight against the Empire. The deaths of Jyn and Cassian are particularly poignant because they symbolize the cost of victory. Unlike many characters in the Star Wars saga who escape peril by sheer luck or destiny, these two heroes do not survive. Their sacrifices add a layer of realism and gravity to the story, proving that the fight against the Empire is not without its price. It serves as a bittersweet reminder that the rebellion, and ultimately the victory over the Empire, came at great personal cost to those who fought for it. The legacy of Rogue One, direct connection to A New Hope, with the transmission of the Death Star plans completed, and the rebellion now in possession of the critical information that can bring down the Empire's ultimate weapon. The film ties directly into the events of A New Hope. The final scenes of Rogue One echo the opening moments of A New Hope, as Princess Leia's ship escapes from Scarif with the plans. The transmission Jyn and Cassian fought so desperately for is now in the hands of the rebellion, leading directly into the events where Luke Skywalker and the Rebels attempt to destroy the Death Star. The closing shot of Rogue One shows Princess Leia standing in the doorway of her ship, holding the Death Star plans in her hand. This seamless connection between the two films reinforces the importance of Rogue One in the overall Star Wars narrative. The sacrifice of the characters, the devastating losses, and the selflessness of the rebellion ultimately set the stage for the hope that will be realized in A New Hope. The Death Star plans, now securely in Rebel hands, become the foundation for the victory that will follow in the original trilogy. In its final moments, Rogue One makes clear that the rebellion's victory over the Empire is not an accident or the result of a fortunate turn of events. It was hard-earned through acts of defiance, courage, and sacrifice. It's a reminder that those who fight for a cause often do so at great personal risk, but their actions have a profound impact on the future of the galaxy. In conclusion, the climactic battle on Scarif, followed by the death of key characters and the successful transmission of the Death Star plans, solidifies Rogue One as a pivotal chapter in the Star Wars saga. The film's themes of sacrifice, heroism, and the cost of victory are central to its emotional impact, and the connection to A New Hope ensures that its place in the larger narrative is not only important, but essential. By the end, Rogue One leaves behind a legacy of bravery, underscoring the notion that the rebellion was built on the backs of ordinary heroes who made extraordinary sacrifices. Character analysis: Jyn Erso, reluctant hero. If you had to name one character who totally redefined what a Star Wars hero could look like, it's Jyn Erso. She doesn't come from royalty like Leia. She's not Force-sensitive like Rey, and she's not part of some ancient prophecy like Anakin or Luke. Jyn is a survivor, plain and simple. Her story isn't about destiny, it's about choice. And by the end of Rogue One, the choices she makes change everything. Backstory and motivation, from abandoned to empowered. Jyn's story starts in pain. As a child, she watches her mother get murdered and her father, Galen Erso, taken by the Empire. Just let that sink in. She's around 8, hiding in a bunker as everything she knows falls apart. That's not the kind of trauma you just walk away from. It shapes who she is. Raised by Saw Gerrera, an extremist rebel fighter who eventually abandons her too, Jyn learns early on that people leave and trusting others is dangerous. That explains why, when we meet her as an adult, she's pretty hardened. She doesn't fight for any cause, doesn't believe in the rebellion or the Empire, she just wants to be left alone. And honestly, can you blame her? But here's the thing, deep down, she hasn't stopped caring. She just stopped showing it. It's only after she's captured by the rebellion and learns her father is still alive and working on the Death Star that things start to shift. Suddenly, it's not just about survival anymore. It's about making things right. She doesn't jump into the role of leader overnight. At first, she's just trying to see her father again. But when she watches his hologram and hears that he secretly planted the flaw that could destroy the Death Star, you can literally see her walls break down. That message, that moment where he says, "I have so much to tell you," hits hard. Her dad, who she thought was a traitor, turns out to be someone who's been risking everything to stop the Empire from the inside. It's a total shift in her perspective. From there, her motivation changes. It's not just personal anymore. She starts fighting not just for her father's memory, but for everyone who suffered under the Empire. That's when Jin starts becoming the leader we didn't know we needed. Emotional struggles, living in the shadow of a father and a broken galaxy. A big part of what makes Jin's arc so powerful is how emotionally messy it is. She's angry. She's hurt. She's guarded. And she has every reason to be. Think about it. Jin's father, Galen, was once a scientist working with the Empire. She believed for years that he willingly helped build a weapon that could destroy planets. That kind of betrayal would mess with anyone's head. So when she finds out that he was actually playing a dangerous long game pretending to cooperate while secretly designing the flaw, it's not just a relief, it's also heartbreaking. He never got the chance to tell her in person. He never got to make it right with her face to face. And just when they finally reconnect, even for a moment he dies, that's the final punch. Jin has to process all this, the truth, the guilt, the loss, while also stepping up in the middle of a war. That's not easy. But instead of breaking down, she pushes forward. What's also important is her relationship with Cassian Andor. Their dynamic is rocky at first. He's all about orders. She's all about doing things her way. But they slowly come to respect each other. When she finds out he was sent to kill her father, she's devastated. She feels betrayed again. And yet, instead of letting that stop her, she turns it into fuel. She decides to take control of her own mission, convincing the rebels to act even when their leadership hesitates. You can see how much she grows emotionally. She starts out keeping her distance from everyone, but by the end, she's risking everything with the team she's come to believe in. That's huge. That change from selfish to selfless is what makes her a true hero. Symbolic representation, what Jin stands for in the Star Wars universe. Jyn Erso might not have the lightsaber fights or force powers we usually associate with Star Wars heroes, but that's kind of the point. She shows that you don't need to be a Jedi to make a difference. You just need conviction. In a universe filled with chosen ones and grand destinies, Jin is something rare, an ordinary person doing something extraordinary. She doesn't have a prophecy guiding her. She wasn't trained from childhood. She wasn't even sure what she believed in at the start. But when the moment came, she stood up. In that way, Jin becomes the face of the everyday hero, someone who rises not because she was chosen, but because she chose to rise. That's such an important message, especially for younger viewers or people who feel like they've made mistakes or come from broken pasts. Jin shows that your past doesn't define you, your actions do. And yeah, it matters that she's a female lead in a franchise that's often been dominated by male protagonists. Jin doesn't just fill a space, she owns it. She's complex, flawed, emotional, and strong. She's not perfect, and the movie doesn't pretend she is. She doesn't always know what to say or do, but she keeps going She pushes through fear, doubt, and grief, and that makes her more relatable than a lot of other heroes. What's also great is that she doesn't need a romantic subplot to feel complete. There's a quiet, emotional connection with Cassian, sure, but it's never the focus. The film doesn't reduce her to someone's love interest. It respects her journey, her agency, and her choices. That's rare, and it's powerful. Jin's sacrifice at the end seals her legacy. She knows she's not getting out alive, but she stays. She chooses to stay. She and Cassian sit together on the beach watching the light of the Death Star's blast come for them. And in that moment, there's peace. Not because they survived, but because they knew what they did mattered. She becomes a symbol of hope, which is exactly what the rebellion needs. Her actions directly lead to the destruction of the Death Star in A New Hope. And that's not just a plot connection, it's a thematic one. She literally passes the torch. Without her, there is no Leia message, no trench run, no Luke Skywalker victory. Final thoughts on Jyn Erso. Jyn Erso's character arc is one of the most grounded and powerful in the Star Wars universe. She starts off jaded, closed off, and angry at the world, but through pain, purpose, and choice, she becomes the spark that lights a fire across the galaxy. She's not a legend. She's not a Jedi. She's not a queen or a chosen one. She's a fighter who stood up when it counted. And in doing so, she proved that real heroism comes from the decisions we make, not the powers we're born with. Jyn Erso may not appear in more Star Wars films, but her impact echoes far beyond Rogue One. She's the reason Hope survived, and that's a legacy worth remembering. Cassian Andor, Diego Luna, the cynical rebel. Cassian Andor is not your typical Star Wars hero. He doesn't swing a lightsaber, and he's not the fresh-faced farm boy inspired by Hope. He's something more complicated and honestly more real. When we meet him, he's already deep in the mess of war, doing whatever it takes to help the rebellion survive. He's not idealistic. He's not wide-eyed. He's a spy, a soldier, and sometimes a killer. In one of his first scenes, Cassian does something shocking. He shoots a fellow informant in the back to avoid getting caught. That's the moment that tells you this isn't the clean-cut world of the Jedi. This is war, and it's messy. Cassian has clearly done things he's not proud of. He lives in that gray space where moral lines get blurry in the name of the greater good. But that's what makes his arc with Jyn so meaningful. At first, he's just following orders. He's sent to extract information and, if needed, kill Galen Erso, no questions asked. He doesn't really see Jyn as anything more than a tool to get the job done. But as the story unfolds, she challenges him. She speaks with conviction, with purpose, something he seems to have lost over the years. And it hits him. He's been fighting for so long, following orders, doing awful things, that he's forgotten why he started fighting in the first place. His moment of change is subtle. He hesitates instead of pulling the trigger on Galen. That hesitation isn't weakness. It's the start of him reclaiming his conscience. By the end, when he chooses to go rogue with Jyn and steal the Death Star plans, knowing it's probably a suicide mission, it's redemption, he's no longer following orders. He's doing the right thing for the right reasons. He chooses hope. He chooses belief. He chooses to be more than just a weapon. Cassian's journey isn't loud or flashy, but it's one of the most powerful arcs in the film. He starts as a man weighed down by guilt and ends as someone who finds peace not because he survives, but because he finally believes in something bigger than himself again. Supporting characters.
K2SO Alan Tudyk, The Unexpected Heart.
Let's be real. K2SO could have been just another droid with attitude. Instead, he ends up being one of the most memorable and emotional parts of Rogue One. His dry sarcasm and brutal honesty make him a perfect counterbalance to the more serious tone of the movie. Lines like, "I'll be there for you. The captain said I had to," are funny, but they also show you how aware he is of his role. Unlike C-3PO or BB-8, K2 isn't just there for comic relief. He grows emotionally attached to Jyn and Cassian in his own robotic way. And when he sacrifices himself to lock the vault doors and protect them during the Scarif mission, it's gutting. You don't expect to feel so much for a droid, but his final stand adds real weight. His death is quiet, strong, and deeply loyal. It's a turning point that shows this mission isn't about glory. It's about giving everything, even your life, for hope. Chirrut Îmwe Donnie Yen and Baze Malbus Jiang Wen, faith and firepower. Chirrut and Baze are like opposite sides of the same coin. Chirrut is a blind warrior monk who believes in the Force, even though he's not a Jedi. He doesn't move things with his mind, but he feels the Force. His mantra, "I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me," becomes something more than just a phrase. It's a statement of belief in something greater, even in the face of death. Chirrut's faith is what guides him, and it gives him strength. That scene where he walks calmly through blaster fire to activate the master switch, that's pure belief in action. He's fearless, not because he's a fighter, but because he trusts the Force will guide him, and it does, right up until the end. Then there's Baze, his partner and protector. At first, Baze seems like he's just muscle all weapons. No faith, but as the movie goes on, you realize how deeply he cares for Chirrut. Their bond is unspoken, but incredibly strong. When Chirrut dies, Baze doesn't fall apart. He follows his friend's example, picking up his mantra and walking into battle. It's the most powerful sign of respect and a quiet, beautiful way of showing how belief can be passed on, even to the most hardened hearts. Together, Chirrut and Baze show that there's more than one way to fight evil. One fights with faith, the other with firepower. But both believe in something bigger by the end. And that's what makes their deaths feel meaningful, not pointless. Bodhi Rook, Riz Ahmed, the unsung hero. Bodhi might seem like a side character, but he's the reason any of this works. He's a former Imperial cargo pilot who decides he's had enough. Inspired by Galen Erso, he defects and risks his life to warn the rebellion about the Death Star. Bodhi's arc is all about courage. He's terrified. He's not a soldier. He's not trained for war, but he keeps going not for glory, but because it's the right thing to do. That moment when he has to fix the comms cable to send the message knowing that stormtroopers are closing in is pure nerve. He could run, but he doesn't. He gets the message through and dies seconds later. Quiet, brave, unforgettable. What's great about Bodhi is that he's the kind of person who usually doesn't get remembered in war stories, the tech guy, the one in the background. But Rogue One gives him his due. Without him, there's no warning, no transmission, no Death Star plans. He's proof that heroes come in all forms, and sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest ripple effects. Themes and symbolism, sacrifice and duty. If there's one thing Rogue One nails harder than any Star Wars movie before it, it's the true cost of rebellion. Not in abstract political terms, not in flashy lightsaber duels, but in real, painful human sacrifice. This film is soaked in it. From the very first act, we're watching people risk and lose everything for the slim chance of giving others a better future. That's what gives Rogue One its emotional power. It's not about chosen ones or destiny. It's about ordinary people who decide to stand up, even when the odds are stacked against them. Let's break down how Rogue One handles sacrifice and duty in a way that feels raw, grounded, and incredibly moving. Personal sacrifice when winning isn't living. At its core, Rogue One is a movie where nobody walks away. Every single main character dies, but the story doesn't treat that as a shock twist or a cheap gimmick. It builds to it slowly, carefully, and with full emotional weight. This isn't a movie about heroes saving the day and going home. It's about what it costs to even create the chance to save the day. Let's start with Jyn Erso. When we meet her, she's angry and bitter. She's not exactly eager to fight for the rebellion. And why would she be? Her mother was killed, her father was taken by the Empire, and she was abandoned by Saw Gerrera. She has every reason to run, to keep her head down and survive. But when she learns the truth about her father's sacrifice, that he built a flaw into the Death Star and entrusted her with that knowledge, everything changes. For Jyn, the mission becomes personal, but not in a revenge kind of way. She doesn't just want to destroy the Death Star. She wants to redeem her father's name. Galen Erso didn't build a weapon of mass destruction because he wanted to. He did it because it was the only way he could resist from the inside. His message to Jyn is heartbreaking. Whatever I do it to protect you. That's sacrifice. That's love. And it lights a fire inside her. By the time she volunteers to lead the mission to steal the Death Star plans, she knows she probably won't survive. But she goes anyway, and so does Cassian, and K2SO, and Shirach, and Baze, and Bodhi. They all go. Not because they think they'll win, but because it has to be done. One of the most painful but powerful lines comes from Cassian when he says, "Everything I did for the rebellion. I couldn't face myself if I gave up now." He's been carrying guilt, shame, and regret for years, and he sees this mission as a way to make it right. Not for himself, but for everyone who came before. For everyone who died for the cause. He's done taking orders that feel wrong. This time, it's about making his life mean something. K2SO's death hits especially hard. He's a droid, but he dies like a human, locking the vault door behind Cassian and Jyn and holding off the stormtroopers until his last battery drops. There's no big speech, just one last moment of trust and loyalty. It's quiet, and it's devastating. Then there's Chirrut, walking across open ground, repeating his mantra as blaster bolts zip past him. "I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me." He knows he's probably gonna die, but he believes his faith will carry him through, and in a way, it does. He gets the switch flipped. He completes his part of the mission, and his death isn't in vain because Baze, the hardened realist, sees it, and something in him shifts. He follows in Chirrut's footsteps, taking on the mission as his own. It's not about survival anymore. It's about finishing what they started. Even Body Rook, the quietest and most overlooked of the team, gets his moment. He's just a pilot, right? Just a guy who ran from the Empire. But he stands his ground and gets the message out, and then he's gone. Just like that. No glory. No reward. Just duty. Just sacrifice. Every character's death serves a purpose. They're not random. They're not hollow. They're deliberate. Each one pushes the mission forward, one step at a time, until the plans are sent and hope is passed into the hands of the next generation. Moral imperatives, doing the right thing even when it hurt. What makes Rogue One so compelling is that these sacrifices aren't made by perfect people. These are deeply flawed, broken, even morally compromised individuals. Cassian has done awful things in the name of the rebellion. Body helped the Empire until he couldn't live with himself. Even Saw Gerrera is willing to torture and bomb if he thinks it helps the cause. And yet, in the end, every one of them chooses to do the right thing, not because they have to, but because they believe it matters. The film constantly wrestles with the question, how far is too far in the name of good? Is it okay to kill, lie, betray if it's for the right reasons? That's something Star Wars usually skips over. The original trilogy is more black and white. Good guys vs. bad guys. But Rogue One throws you into the murky middle and says, these are the people who make the hard choices. So the heroes in the next movie get to be hopeful. Think about the moment Jyn stands in front of the Rebel Council. They're arguing over whether to fight, to hide, to surrender, and she cuts through all of it. Rebellions are built on hope, she says. It's not just a catchy line. It's a reminder that someone has to act, even when it's scary, even when it's unpopular. Especially then. The whole Rogue One team embraces that truth. They stop being pawns in a political game and start being real rebels. Not because they think they'll be remembered, but because they know someone has to light the fuse even if they never see the fireworks. That's what makes their actions so heroic. Not the explosions or the blaster fights, but the quiet courage of choosing to stand up when sitting down would be easier. Choosing to die for people who will never know their names. The bigger picture, why their sacrifice matters. The final scene of the film ties everything together in the most poetic way possible. As the plans are uploaded and the Death Star fires on Scarif, Jyn and Cassian don't try to run. They don't scream. They don't panic. They sit quietly on the beach, watching the light rush toward them, holding on to each other. There's a peace in that moment. Not because they wanted to die, but because they chose to give their lives for something bigger. And that choice matters. It's what leads directly into A New Hope. Without Rogue One, there's no trench run, no Luke Skywalker, no rebellion victory. The whole future of the galaxy hangs on these characters most people in the Star Wars universe will never even hear about. But we do. We know. That's the real beauty of this film. It turns background lore into frontline bravery. It says, hey, those people who got the Death Star plans, this is what they went through. This is what it cost. And suddenly, that one line in New Hope, many Bothans died to bring us this information, hits way harder. Because now we've seen the sacrifice. We've felt it. In the end, Rogue One isn't just about war. It's about why people fight. Not for revenge, not for power, but for the chance, just the chance to give others a better life. That's what sacrifice and duty look like when they're done right. And that's why this film, more than almost any other in the saga, sticks with you. Themes and symbolism. Hope and resistance. If Rogue One had to be summed up in a single word, it would be hope. Not blind optimism, but the kind of hard-earned, fragile hope that's born in darkness when everything seems lost, but people choose to fight anyway. It's a film about resistance, not because the rebels think they'll win, but because they believe it's worth trying. From the start, we see a rebellion that's messy, divided, and afraid. The Leadership Council argues, some want to strike, others want to retreat. There's fear in the room. You can feel it. The Empire has a planet-killing weapon, and no one really knows how to stop it. The whole system is breaking under the weight of its own fear. And then Jin stands up and says something that cuts through the noise. We have hope. Rebellions are built on hope. What makes this line powerful isn't just the delivery, though Felicity Jones nails it. It's that we believe it because we've seen what she's been through. She's not speaking as a symbol. She's speaking as someone who has lost everything: her parents, her childhood, her sense of belonging, and still chooses to believe that what they do matters. Cassian, too, echoes this mindset. He tells Jin, I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old. For him, the fight against the Empire is more than orders. It's his entire life. But Rogue One doesn't paint resistance as glamorous. It shows the cost, the covert assassinations, the lies, the emotional toll. It asks, how far are you willing to go to resist evil? And it answers, as far as you must. But what really cements the theme of hope is the final act, the desperate all-or-nothing mission to Scarif. The moment the rebels start transmitting the plans, you can almost feel the spark of hope catching fire. One act of courage leading to another, one life passed on for something bigger. Each death is a torch handed off to the next runner in a relay of resistance. And then, right at the end, when it looks like all might be lost, the data is physically passed hand to hand until it reaches a familiar white-gowned figure. Leia Organa, standing calm and defiant, holding the plans in her hands. Her response to being asked what they've just received, one word: hope. That final moment doesn't just set up a new hope, it redefines it. Because now we understand that the hope of that title wasn't just about Luke Skywalker or the Force. It was about the people who gave their lives to make a chance possible. The spark that would one day ignite the rebellion began with a ragtag team no one remembers, but we do. Family, legacy, and redemption. One of Rogue One's quieter strengths is how it handles the idea of legacy, both personal and political, through the lens of broken families and people trying to make peace with their past. At the heart of that is the story of Jin and her father, Galen Erso. From the outside, Galen is the architect of the Empire's most terrible weapon. But inside, he's a father trying to do the right thing in impossible circumstances. When the Empire took him, he could have given in. Instead, he chose to resist in the only way he could, by building a flaw into the Death Star. A deliberate, hidden weakness, one that could be exploited to destroy it. He doesn't just tell anyone this. He tells Jin, in a hidden message buried inside a captured pilot's mind, he reaches out across time and space to say, everything I do it to protect you. That line is the emotional backbone of the movie. It changes everything we thought we knew about him, and it sets Jin on her path. Their relationship is complicated. Jin spent most of her life believing he abandoned her. When she finally sees him again on Edu, it's only for a few moments before he dies. They never get a real reunion. No full circle closure. Just the weight of love, loss, and a responsibility that now falls on Jin's shoulders. But what Galen gives Jin isn't just information. It's a second chance to carry on the fight he started and to use her voice to rally others. She isn't a GD. She doesn't have a lightsaber, but she leads. She becomes the hope that her father believed in. That's legacy. Not just what you leave behind, but what you inspire. Cassian's journey mirrors that in many ways. When we meet him, he's cold and tactical. He shoots a fellow rebel in the back during the first mission, not out of cruelty, but because he's been trained to do whatever it takes for the cause. He's been in the shadows so long that he's almost lost touch with why he fights. But Jin pulls him out of that darkness. Watching her passion, her willingness to risk everything, reminds him that there's a difference between orders and conviction. He begins to make decisions not because he was told to, but because he knows they're right. By the time they land on Scarif, he's not an assassin anymore. He's a leader, a partner, a believer. There's a moment before the final mission where Cassian gathers a small team of volunteers. He tells Jin, "Some of us, most of us, we've all done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion, but we believe what we're doing is right." That's redemption. Not wiping the slate clean, but choosing in the face of guilt and regret to do better. Together, Jin and Cassian represent two sides of the same coin. Jin carries the legacy of her father trying to turn pain into purpose. Cassian seeks redemption through service, turning his haunted past into a future worth fighting for. And when they sit together on the beach waiting for the explosion that will end their lives, they don't run. They've made peace with their choices. And through their deaths, they ensure others will live. Directorial style and vision. Let's talk about Gareth Edwards for a second. His work on Rogue One was nothing short of a turning point for the Star Wars franchise. It's like he looked at everything that made the original trilogy feel so grand and iconic, then stripped it down to something more raw, real, and human. Unlike the shiny, clean-cut tone we'd seen in the prequels, Rogue One dives headfirst into the muddy, chaotic trenches of war. What's interesting is that Edwards didn't try to make Rogue One feel like a traditional Star Wars movie. He wasn't focused on Jedi or Destiny or Chosen Ones. This story is about regular people, outcasts, spies, ex-prisoners, doing something unbelievably heroic, knowing they won't live to see the victory. That's heavy, but it's what gives the movie its emotional punch. He brings in this war documentary style to the direction. A lot of the camera work feels handheld, slightly shaky, not in a distracting way, but enough to make you feel like you're there with the characters. There's no glorified glamour shots of our heroes jumping through explosions in slow motion. Instead, everything feels dangerous and immediate, like at any second someone might not make it. Edwards also had a clear love for scale. Remember those shots of the Star Destroyers hovering over Jeddah? Or the way the Death Star eclipses a planet as it fires? That sense of size isn't just for show, it's meant to make the characters feel small, to remind us how outmatched the rebels are. But that's the point of the movie, right? Even when the odds are insane, people still fight. Tone-wise, Rogue One has this kind of constant unease. From the very start, there's this building tension. We don't get much time to breathe between scenes, and it never feels like anyone is totally safe. That pacing works because the film is essentially a countdown. Once you know what's at stake, stealing the Death Star plans, everything feels like it's racing towards something unstoppable. Also, Edwards managed to pull off the impossible. He made Darth Vader scary again. That final hallway scene, pure terror. No monologues, no forced jokes, just raw power and horror movie vibes. It's a masterclass in restraint and payoff. What makes Gareth Edwards' style work here is that he treats Star Wars not as fantasy, but as grounded war drama. It's like he filtered Saving Private Ryan or Black Hawk down through the lens of a galaxy fair far away, and it somehow made the universe feel bigger and more real. Cinematography and visual aesthetics. Now let's talk about Greg Fraser, the cinematographer behind Rogue One. The guy absolutely nailed it. He gave the film a look that was completely different from what we'd seen before in Star Wars, but it still felt like it belonged. Fraser shot the film with a mix of wide, sweeping landscape shots and up-close, personal frames. One moment we're seeing the grand expanse of the beaches of Scarif or the deserts of Jeddah, and the next we're practically nose-to-nose with Jyn as she stares down her fear. That back and forth between scope and intimacy is what makes the movie feel so alive. One of the coolest things about Fraser's approach is how he used natural lighting. A lot of Star Wars movies in the past had this polished, artificial look, but Fraser let shadows stay shadows. Scenes felt gritty, not overly lit or softened. It made places like the Rebel base on Yavin IV or saw Gara's hideout feel like real, grimy corners of a lived-in galaxy. And Scarif, let's not forget how beautiful that entire third act looks. You've got the blinding sun, the clear blue water, the stormy skies above as Star Destroyers hover. It's such a weird combo for a battle, but it works. The contrast of this tropical paradise being torn apart by war is both jarring and brilliant. He also made brilliant use of color. The muted, dusty tones of Jeddah convey a sense of lost history and destruction. Ediu is all storm clouds and rain, perfect for a moral low point. And Scarif is so bright that it almost lulls you into forgetting how deadly the situation is until the explosions start. Fraser had previously worked on movies like Zero Dark 30, and you can see that influence here. There's a lot of focus on framing shots that feel tactical, almost like you're watching real soldiers in action. That's especially true during the Scarif battle. The camera stays low, follows the characters from behind, and often stays close to the ground. It's not flashy. It's practical, and it feels real. In short, Fraser didn't just shoot a pretty sci-fi movie. He created a visual language that supports the story's tone dark, urgent, and human. His camera helps tell us how the characters are feeling without them saying a word. That's great cinematography, editing, and pacing. Editing-wise, Rogue One had a complicated journey. The film famously went through reshoots, and many fans were nervous about what that meant. But when you see the final product, the editing actually comes off as super tight and purposeful. Early drafts of the film reportedly had slower buildup and more scenes showing the team getting to know each other. But that was reworked to keep things moving, and honestly, it works. From the minute we meet Jyn as an adult, the story rarely slows down. She's being busted out of prison, thrown into rebel politics, and then shipped off to Jeddah almost immediately. The pacing keeps you locked in. The battle on Scarif, in particular, is edited to perfection. There are three things happening at once: the ground assault, the infiltration inside the tower, and the space battle in orbit. The editing juggles all three without confusion. You always know where everyone is, what they're doing, and why it matters. That's not easy to pull off with so many characters and storylines happening simultaneously. One huge change that came in during reshoots was Cassian and Jyn's final run to the transmission tower. In the first trailers, you see them sprinting across the beach in broad daylight. That sequence was cut entirely and replaced with the more emotionally heavy version we got: the climb, the desperate message, the quiet moment on the beach. It's way more powerful and fitting for the story. The editing also does a great job of pacing emotional beats. Right When the action could get overwhelming, you get moments like Chirrut's blind walk across the battlefield or Bodhi's panic in the cargo bay. Those pauses aren't just filler, they're reminders of the cost of what's happening. In the end, the editing helps sell the tone. This isn't a story about victory through flashy moves. It's about struggle, survival, and people giving everything for a cause. Every cut, every transition feels intentional, keeping you emotionally and narratively engaged until the very last second. Special effects and practical techniques. One of the coolest things about Rogue One is how it blends old school practical effects with modern CGI. Gareth Edwards insisted on building real sets like the Rebel base on Yavin IV or the interiors of the U-Wing, so actors weren't just acting against green screens all the time. Meanwhile, the digital work is some of the best in the franchise. The CGI for the space battles is intense and seamless. And yes, the resurrection of Grand Moff Tarkin and the young Leia is still controversial, but it shows how far the tech has come. The result? A movie that feels both fresh and true to classic Star Wars. Musical themes and composition. When Rogue One hit theaters in 2016, one of the most talked about creative shifts was in the music. This was the first Star Wars movie without a full score by John Williams. Instead, the responsibility fell to Michael Giacchino, who had only 4.5 weeks to write and record the entire score after replacing Alexander Desplat due to scheduling issues. For most composers, that would have been a disaster. But Giacchino didn't just get the job done, he made the score feel like it belonged in the Star Wars universe, while still carving out its own identity. Let's start with the basics. Giacchino is known for his work on The Incredibles, Up, Jurassic World, and the rebooted Star Trek series. He knows how to build emotion through music, and that's exactly what he brought to Rogue One. His score strikes a tricky balance, respecting the musical DNA of the original saga without relying too much on it. Instead of just recycling Williams' themes, Giacchino created original motifs that matched the tone of the film. Take Jyn Erso's theme, for example. It's melancholy and hesitant at first, just a few piano notes that feel isolated, a lot like Jyn herself. But as she steps into her role as a leader, the music builds alongside her, swelling with strings and horns, transforming into something almost heroic. By the end of the film, when she's staring death in the face, that theme isn't just music, it's a reminder of everything she's chosen to stand for. Giacchino also created an Imperial suite for the antagonists, especially Orson Krennic. It has that cold, almost classical march-like structure, heavy brass and snare drums that echo Williams' Imperial March, but it's not a copy. Krennic's theme feels more unstable, which reflects his desperate desire for power and his fragile ego. The action scenes, like the final battle on Scarif, are where Giacchino truly shines. Tracks like Scrambling the Rebel Fleet and Your Father Would Be Proud managed to juggle chaos, urgency, and heartbreak all in a few minutes. And when the classic Star Wars theme sneaks in right at the end during the final data transmission to Leia, it hits hard. It's not just fan service, it's catharsis. One really clever move Giacchino made was when to stay silent. There are scenes, especially during tense moments on Jedha or as Jyn watches her father die, where the music disappears almost entirely. That absence of sound actually makes the emotions more intense. You can feel the weight of the moment unfiltered. In short, Giacchino didn't try to compete with John Williams. Instead, he complimented him, honoring the past while giving Rogue One its own musical identity. And that's why the score doesn't just work, it elevates everything on screen. Sound effects and ambient audio. Music isn't the only thing that pulls you into Rogue One. The sound design plays just as big of a role in shaping the atmosphere. If the visuals ground the story in a gritty reality, the sound gives it texture and life. Let's talk about how every planet sounds different. Jeddah has this eerie, broken down feeling. There's wind whistling through old stone ruins, distant murmurs of stormtroopers, and the subtle buzz of energy from kyber crystals. It feels ancient and spiritual. Then you go to industrial. You hear echoes bouncing off damp metal, and there's this heavy hum in the air that makes the whole place feel oppressive. Scarif, on the other hand, is bright and tropical, but don't let that fool you. When the battle starts, the sound becomes almost overwhelming. Laser blasts, X-wing flybys, explosions all layered in, but somehow it never turns into noise. It's chaotic, but it's controlled chaos. One of the standout audio moments in the movie is, without a doubt, Darth Vader's hallway scene. The buildup is terrifying. At first, it's dead silent. Then you hear the low hum of his breathing. The lightsaber ignites with that iconic snap hiss, and suddenly all hell breaks loose. Every movement he makes is punctuated by that deep hum and the brutal swipes of his saber. You hear rebels screaming, blasters firing, and none of it matters. He's cutting through them like they're nothing. That scene is less than a minute long, but it's unforgettable partly because of how well the sound builds that sense of dread. And then there's K2SO. His voice, performed by Alan Tudyk, is filled with sarcasm and dryness, but the sound design adds mechanical realism to his personality. His footsteps are heavier than a human's. When he moves, you hear little servo clicks and hydraulic whirs. It reminds you that he's not just comic relief, he's still a machine built for combat, and that duality is reinforced through sound. Even the quieter moments have weight. When Jyn watches the hologram message from her father, you hear the soft static of the projection, the ambient hum of the room, and nothing else. It's intimate. You feel like you're intruding on a private moment. The silence lets her emotions come through clearly, and the sound respects that. In every scene, sound isn't just something added later, it's part of the story. Whether it's the terrifying silence before a battle, the layered chaos of a firefight, or the sad emptiness of a quiet goodbye, the sound pulls you deeper into this world. Integration of audio and visual storytelling. What makes Rogue One feel so powerful isn't just the visuals or the music or the sound design, it's how they all work together. The visuals show you war, the music helps you feel it, and the sound makes it real. When the Rebel fleet shows up at Scarif, you see the ships appear, but it's the deep rumble of engines and the rising score that makes your heart race. When Jyn and Cassian sit on the beach at the end, the visuals are peaceful, but the faint music and low hum of destruction make the moment tragic. It's storytelling through sound, and it hits hard. Critical reviews. Upon its release in December 2016, Rogue One, a Star Wars story, quickly garnered attention, not just as a spin-off, but as a departure from the traditional Star Wars formula. The film's darker, more grounded warlike tone stood out, and critics were quick to praise its gritty realism and emotional weight. One of the most consistent compliments was the war film feel that director Gareth Edwards brought to the story. Rather than focusing on the grand operatic style of the main saga, Rogue One embraced a more intimate and raw look at rebellion and sacrifice. Critics compared its aesthetic and narrative to real-world wartime dramas like Saving Private Ryan or The Dirty Dozen, noting how it focused on the sacrifices made by ordinary people for a larger cause. As Mark Kermode of The Guardian said, it felt like the anti-heroic side of Star Wars, offering a more human, less fantastical view of the struggle against the Empire. The performances of the cast were universally praised, particularly Felicity Jones as Jyn Erso. Jyn's arc from a disillusioned fugitive to a determined leader resonated with audiences, and Jones' portrayal of vulnerability mixed with fierce determination drew comparisons to other iconic Star Wars characters. Critics noted that her quiet strength was a major component of the film's emotional appeal. Diego Luna's Cassian Andor also received accolades, with many highlighting his moral complexity. Cassian's willingness to do whatever it takes for the rebellion, including actions that blur ethical lines, added a layer of depth that was new to the Star Wars universe. Meanwhile, Alan Tudyk's K2SO became an instant fan favorite for his perfect mix of dry humor and human-like sincerity. However, the film wasn't without its criticisms. Pacing issues were frequently mentioned, especially in the film's early stages, where some felt the setup was too slow. Additionally, some of the secondary characters, such as Bodhi Rook, Riz Ahmed, and Chirrut Mulwi Donna Yen, received mixed reviews for not being fully fleshed out. While their performances were appreciated, the lack of deeper character development made some audiences feel less invested in their individual arcs. Visually, the film received widespread praise, especially in the final act, which showcased some of the most breathtaking space battles in the Star Wars franchise. But even with this, some noted that the film occasionally felt too close to the ground, particularly in its depictions of large-scale battles and alien landscapes. While that grounded approach worked for most of the movie, the grander elements sometimes felt constrained. Overall, Rogue One was hailed as a refreshing change from the typical Star Wars formula, with its strong themes of sacrifice and duty, solid performances, and emotional stakes resonating deeply with critics. Despite some minor flaws, it was considered a worthy addition to the franchise. Audience reaction and box office. Audience feedback for Rogue One was overwhelmingly positive, especially from longtime Star Wars fans who appreciated the film's unique take on the franchise. Fans were eager to see a Star Wars film that didn't revolve around Jedi Knights and Skywalkers, and Rogue One delivered exactly that. The fact that it was set right before the events of A New Hope also allowed it to tap into nostalgia while charting new territory in terms of storytelling. Social media buzz was rampant before and after the film's release. Fans celebrated the movie's grittier tone, the emotional depth of the characters, and its homage to the classic Star Wars themes. The final scene where Princess Leia receives the Death Star plans was met with enthusiastic praise for its seamless connection to the original 1977 film, and many fans viewed the death of the main characters as a satisfying yet heartbreaking conclusion to the story. From a box office standpoint, Rogue One performed admirably. The film grossed over $1 billion worldwide, making it the third highest grossing film of 2016. After Finding Dory and Captain America: Civil War, its financial success also proved that there was an audience for Star Wars spin-offs, especially those with a darker, more mature tone. Although it didn't reach the levels of The Force Awakens to $1 billion, Rogue One set a strong precedent for future standalone Star Wars films, including Solo, A Star Wars Story, and the upcoming anthology project. Critically, the film also performed well, scoring a solid 85% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 84/100 on Metacritic. Fans and critics alike praised it for balancing a compelling standalone story with enough nods to the broader Star Wars mythology. The movie's strong box office performance and enduring popularity among fans confirmed its place in the Star Wars canon. Comparative analysis. In terms of tone and stakes, Rogue One is one of the most distinct entries in the Star Wars universe. Unlike the more traditional episodic films, which focus on a battle between good and evil through the lens of iconic characters, Rogue One emphasizes the moral complexity and sacrifice of everyday people caught in the rebellion. The lack of Jedi also sets it apart, grounding it in a more realistic, warlike atmosphere. Compared to other Star Wars films, Rogue One stands out as the grittiest and most mature entry, offering a unique perspective on the fight against the Empire. Influence on modern action and war cinema. When Rogue One, a Star Wars story, was released, it marked a significant departure from the traditional Star Wars saga. The film didn't just bring a new story to the franchise, it also introduced a new, more grounded and gritty tone that significantly influenced both the Star Wars universe and modern action and war cinema. Before Rogue One, the Star Wars films had mostly followed a familiar formula of high adventure, mystical force battles, and heroic showdowns, with most of the action relying heavily on larger-than-life characters like Jedi Knights and Sith Lords. Rogue One, however, took a more realistic approach, focusing on the lives of ordinary soldiers and operatives caught in the rebellion's fight against the oppressive Empire. This shift in tone marked a direct influence on modern action films and war dramas, showcasing the impact of everyday heroes fighting for a cause larger than themselves. By portraying the grit and sacrifice involved in warfare, Rogue One drew inspiration from classic war cinema like Saving Private Ryan and The Dirty Dozen. Its portrayal of the human cost of war added emotional depth to the action, focusing on the characters' struggles, fears, and desires, which were often sacrificed in the service of a higher goal. This theme of sacrifice, paired with the film's more grounded combat sequences, made Rogue One stand out not just within the Star Wars franchise, but within the broader landscape of action films. It wasn't just about flashy space battles or epic lightsaber duels. The focus was on the real consequences of war and the emotional weight of the choices people make in extreme situations. The film's commitment to realism also extended to its visual style, heavily influenced by war films' documentary-like approach to cinematography. The camera often mimics the chaotic, intense energy of battle, with handheld shots and natural lighting that add to the film's sense of immediacy and tension. This focus on authenticity and emotional resonance is a hallmark of Rogue One's influence, and it set a new precedent for future entries in the Star Wars franchise and beyond. It proved that an action-packed science fiction film could also be deeply emotional and rooted in the human experience of war and sacrifice, paving the way for other films that followed, including Dune 2021 and the Mandalorian TV series. Fandom and social media engagement. The release of Rogue One also had a profound impact on the Star Wars fandom, particularly through the creation of online communities that continue to engage with the film's characters, themes, and moments. From the very beginning, Rogue One set itself apart by introducing a new, diverse group of characters that resonated with fans in powerful ways. One of the biggest impacts was the lasting presence of Jyn Erso as a new type of hero within the Star Wars universe. Played by Felicity Jones, Jyn's journey from a disillusioned, rebellious young woman to a selfless leader of the rebellion struck a chord with audiences. Fans online, especially women and younger audiences, embraced Jyn as a symbol of strength, resilience, and self-determination, and she became an important figure within the Star Wars canon. Hashtags like Jyn Erso and Rogue One flooded social media platforms, with fans sharing their love for her character and discussing her role as a powerful female lead in a traditionally male-dominated genre. The film also sparked conversations about representation in the Star Wars universe. Characters like Chirrut Îmwe and Baze Malbus brought diverse representation to the forefront, particularly through their exploration of spirituality, identity, and friendship. Social media communities also became places for fans to engage with the film's deeper themes, such as sacrifice, loyalty, and rebellion. Fan art, memes, and tributes to the film's characters flooded platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit, and a new wave of fan fiction emerged, expanding on the Rogue One story in creative and exciting ways. The film's emotional depth and powerful storytelling led to passionate discussions, which helped build a fandom culture that continued to thrive long after the movie's release. Even as new Star Wars films came out, Rogue One maintained its own unique space in the hearts of fans, proving that a standalone film could leave a lasting impression and deepen the connection between Star Wars and its audience. Long-term legacy. Rogue One's long-term legacy will likely be one of narrative innovation and emotional storytelling. It helped redefine what a Star Wars film could be, proving that the universe was capable of exploring darker, more complex themes beyond the saga's usual tropes. Its emphasis on the sacrifices of ordinary people in times of war set a precedent for future sci-fi and war films, especially in how these genres can intersect with human emotions and moral dilemmas. Within the Star Wars universe, Rogue One paved the way for future standalone stories and spin-offs, influencing both future films and television series within the franchise. Summary of key insights. Rogue One, Star Wars story stands as a pivotal moment in the Star Wars saga, offering both a unique narrative perspective and a fresh approach to cinematic storytelling within a familiar universe. Unlike the main episodic films, which often revolve around the Jedi and the mystical force, Rogue One focuses on a group of ordinary rebels who rise to face a seemingly insurmountable challenge, stealing the Death Star plans, a mission that will have significant repercussions for the galaxy's future. At its core, Rogue One is a story about sacrifice and duty. Each member of the Rogue One team, from Jyn Erso to Cassian Andor and beyond, faces moral dilemmas that test their loyalty to the rebellion and their personal values. Jyn Erso's journey is particularly poignant as she transforms from a disillusioned survivor to a selfless leader who ultimately sacrifices her life for a greater cause. Her struggle with her father's legacy and her eventual acceptance of her role within the rebellion highlights themes of family, legacy, and the burden of responsibility. The film's character-driven story is further enriched by its emotional depth, which is supported by Gareth Edwards' directorial vision. His war-inspired approach, combining a grounded, gritty tone with emotional resonance, is enhanced by Greg Fraser's cinematography, which immerses the audience in the raw, chaotic reality of the galactic conflict. The use of wide shots, natural lighting, and handheld cameras adds to the feeling of urgency, making every battle scene feel both epic and personal. This sense of realism and emotional engagement sets Rogue One apart from other entries in the franchise, solidifying its place as not only a Star Wars film, but also a war film in its own right. Another standout element is Michael Giacchino's musical score, which strikes a balance between honoring the iconic themes of Star Wars and introducing new, emotionally charged compositions. The sound design also complements the visual storytelling with the juxtaposition of loud, intense action sequences and quieter, more intimate moments, reinforcing the stakes and emotional weight of the narrative. Rogue One also introduces a more diverse set of characters, each with unique backgrounds and motivations. The film's supporting characters like K2SO and Baze Malbus add layers to the narrative, offering a broad range of personalities that contribute to the team's dynamic. Each character's development is compelling, and their sacrifices are crucial in ensuring the success of the mission, all contributing to the overarching theme of selflessness. In summary, Rogue One is a film that not only expands the Star Wars universe, but also elevates it, introducing new themes and narrative elements that resonate with audiences and enrich the franchise's legacy. Through its grounded tone, emotional depth, and character-driven story, it provides a fresh lens on the rebellion's fight against the Empire and the power of resistance.